All right, welcome back. Welcome back. Let's get started. So, who is Rami Ismail? Aside from what you have undoubtedly already heard, I would consider him a friend, a little bit of an enigma, probably also to himself, an inspiration, and, generally a very good person. Rami says things that need saying, some that don't, and occasionally some that need taking back, but always with the very best intent. Whenever I've heard this world improver speak, I've enjoyed and learned from the opportunity. So sit back, enjoy, learn, and if we have time, most importantly, challenge him on what he says, because that's where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Hi. It's always terrifying when people introduce you because you never know where they're going with it. This was a very nice one. Thank you so much, Junie. Let me quickly do a short version. I'm Rami Ismail. I used to run a game studio called Vlambeer, which was a two-person game studio founded here in the Netherlands. We made a bunch of games about explosions and screen shake. Besides that, I also make tools for independent developers. I'm probably best known for PressKit, which is a free tool developers can use to make press kits, even though nowadays people use a lot of their own versions of PressKit. A lot of them are still built on the structure that was created by PressKit, which I think is really cool. I run a games conference called GameDev.world. We did our first one in 2019. We're doing a new one this year, end of year. And GameDev.world is unique in that it is an event where all talks can be done in 8 languages, and we translate all talks to the 7 other languages. So you can listen to a talk by somebody who speaks in Portuguese, and if you were somebody who only speaks Arabic, you'd be able to follow the talk. It was super inspiring back in 2019, and it is one of my larger passions in the games industry, is to make the games industry more equitable around the world. And one of those challenges is to challenge the language barrier. Games are in English. Code is in English. I don't know if you've ever considered, but if you speak Dutch, isn't it weird that you go, if x is 5, while in Dutch we would go, if x5 is? And it's like this tiny little mental step that we do every time when you write a line of code that other people might not have. It gets way more complicated when you go to other languages. I was talking to a researcher the other day, and she mentioned that in, I think it was Thai, they don't use spaces. Good luck parsing that. In Hebrew, they have apostrophes in words. Good luck parsing that. There's so much in the games industry that is English first, and I try to challenge that. GameDev.world is part of that. As part of those initiatives, I also used to run a panel called #1 Reason to Be. Originally started as a panel for women in games, ran by Brando Romero and Lee Alexander. They ran it for several years until they passed the torch of it on to me and asked me to bring speakers from around the world to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. We paid for their flights, we paid for their hotel, we paid for their tickets. We gave 6 people from around the world the opportunity to go to GDC and tell the story of what is cool about game development in their country. What is cool about game development in Madagascar? What is cool about game development in Jordan? What is cool about game development in Uruguay? I write a newsletter called Leveling the Playing Field. I'll have a link to that at the end. And as Junie so aptly said, I often tweet too much and say things that I feel need to be said. And then sometimes I fully agree with what I said. Sometimes I regret what I said. But usually I'm happy that it was said anyway. I do always give a disclaimer at the start of my talks, and I want to give that same disclaimer today. I am a person. I started game development 15 years ago. I ran a game studio in a time where the best advice you had for starting a game studio was make Flash games. So some of the advice I give is colored by that experience, right? By what I've done in the games industry, by what I've learned in the games industry. And I want you, when you're listening to this talk, to kind of think about this talk as advice from a person with that background. Not as truth, not as dogma, not as a thing you have to do, just the things that I've seen, that I've felt, that I've thought, that I think would be relevant to tell you about. I would also recommend that you take that attitude towards every talk that happened here. I was watching the end of Richie's talk just now. Phenomenal stuff. fully agree with all of the advice that was in there. If you fully disagree, don't have to listen to him. If you disagree with me, don't have to listen to me, right? Cool. Just wanted to have said that. So, for the past 3-4 years, I've stopped being part of active development. So after Vlaanderen shut down, I was a little bit burned out, and I decided that I would take a short break from making games. Now, I'm sort of starting to get back into it, but for the past 3 years, I thought, why not follow my other passion, which is help game developers make games and make rent. So the past few years, I've been consulting. And I've been helping developers, and I've done it at really low rates so that anybody can access it. So if you're from an emergent territory, if you're from places around the world, it's free. You don't pay anything. If you're from a place like the Netherlands, it's €1 a minute. So for half an hour, you pay 30 minutes, and I just consult. And then if you want to do larger ones, I have corporate rates and stuff like that. Let's not talk about those. Charge rich people. But one thing I've realized doing this is that I get a lot of similar problems and questions. There's a few things that just kind of keep happening, and you can usually identify them by certain things that developers say. So I want to give a presentation on how not to run a game studio. So over the past 3 years, I've consulted with almost 1,500 game developers. I helped sign almost $30 million in video games deals, which is quite a bit, although last year it's been a lot worse because the economy is not great. I write that newsletter, I have over 6,000 subs, and I keep getting the same questions, and those are the questions I want to talk about. And specifically, I have 12 things I really want to talk about. 12 sentences, spread over 4 topics. We're just going to go through them one by one. I'll tell you what the problem is, I'll tell you how to fix it or approach it, and then hopefully by the end you'll sort of see the theme that I'm seeing and figure out how you can prevent any of these things from happening to you, your studio, or potentially if you work for a studio, the leadership of your studio. Okay? Let's talk about team. Team is one of those things that is somewhat invisible to studios until they actually have to start thinking about it, but from the start, the team is probably the only thing a studio has. It's the first thing you get before starting a studio, before starting a name, before starting a brand, before starting anything, is you have people. And because people is so integral, it surprises me that very often people get team wrong. Now, there's a few sentences that I've become sort of allergic to over the past few years, and we're going to go through them. The first one is, we rise to the challenge, which sounds awesome, and it's terrible, because effectively it means we're growing our studio size too large. That's really what it means. Like, here's the thing. The challenge in game development isn't static. It moves. So at the start of a project, you're doing ideation. What do you need? Designer, concept artist, programmer. You can iterate, you can ideate on games, even at AAA studios with a team of 6. In indie studios, it's usually 2 or 3. And then you hit production. Oh God, now you need artists. And you have a bunch of artists, you need a bunch of programmers, you have a bunch of programmers, probably some designers, level designer, okay, you need that, cool. And now you're more than 7 people, well, we should probably get a producer. Okay, now I have a producer. Oh, we have a producer now, we actually have more capacity, we can hire more people. So now the game gets larger, the studio gets larger. And there's these weird stops in game studio size. The first one is around 7 people. That's where you have to get serious. Serious time. You hire a producer, you make sure you have a producer. That gives you about 7 to 10 people per producer, sort of like the golden rule in game development. So say you hire a second producer because you have 11 people. Well, now you have a second producer that's just sitting there doing nothing. Oh God. Well, maybe we can hire some more artists. So your next stop is around 20, 14 to 20. The next one is 40. After that, it's 80. And studios rise to the challenge. So what studios do is they hire up, they hire up, they hire up. And at the end of that, well, then you're done. And when you're done, your team goes down to 12 that you need, 10. Ideate, maintenance. Right? Maintenance doesn't have to be a large team. An artist, a programmer, narrative, maybe a designer. Cool. But you now have 40 people. So for your next game, you go and you pitch a game for 40 people. And then the same thing happens. Because, okay, you get 40 people, that's what you needed to ideate this idea, that's what you need to make a vertical slice. Now you're making the game, production, you need to scale up, you scale up, and you grow again. So my general rule is to try and grow below the challenge. If the challenge is here, just be 2 people short, right? And figure it out. It's not bad for creativity. It just requires you to be smart about scoping. Just go, okay, you know what? Maybe we scope this one world too large. Let's remove one world. One character too many, let's remove one character. Whatever it is that you can scope down a little bit from whatever you pitched to get you in that scope range where you can keep doing it with the current team, that's great. You grow intentionally only. If you want to grow as part of your studio, you grow. We have a really messed up thing happening in video games. One of my least favorite things about games. You ever had that really good artist in your team? They're really good at art. Incredible. You know what people do? They promote them. You know what they promote them to? Management. You know what a lot of really good artists are not good at? Fucking management. Same is true for programmers, designers, writers, QA. Whatever role you are, if you're really good at it, for some reason we go, okay, you know what, you've done enough. Go write some documents. The problem is that all our promotions in games follow the vector of management. We make people go up in management power. We don't give them a better salary. We don't just go, you know what, great, you do great art. We'll call you, like, I don't know, senior artist, and we'll just pay you more. You keep doing well, we'll just keep paying you more. No, instead what we do is we tell people, okay, you're a senior artist now, there's no way up besides lead or director. So if you want to get a pay raise, go to another company. And then come back. Then we'll pay you more. I have no idea why this happens, but it happens everywhere. If you have a team where somebody is really good at something and you want to keep them, just work with them on figuring out what they need to grow without necessarily putting them in a leadership position. Leadership is hard. It's not an easy skill. It takes communication, it takes diligence, it takes the ability to communicate very clearly. It takes a willingness to want to lead. Those are not better qualities than artists. They're just different qualities. You're not a better creative because you can lead a team, you're just a better leader. And leader also isn't better. A leader without a team is worth nothing. So this idea that leadership automatically means that you're better or you deserve to get paid more, I don't know what happened, but it happened here, and we need to stop it. We just straight up need to stop it. Because when you put people in charge of a team that don't want to be in charge of a team, you get situations like a team I helped the other day, where their lead artist straight up refused to work in a way that their team could work with. And they said, well, this is the way I have always done it. So the team should adjust to that because I'm the lead. That's not a good leader. Why is this person in a leadership position? Well, because they were the best artist. So when you look at promotions, when you look at your team, when it comes to leadership, pick the people that are best at leadership, even in small teams, even in tiny teams. The key word here is seems. You know, language is tricky. That many different things, many same words mean very different things. There used to be this exercise that one of my teachers back at the HKU used to give, where he would ask, okay, I'm going to say a word, and you say the first word that comes up in your mind. And he always used the word sun. That was his word. And if I would pick you, I say the word sun, big ball of lava in the sky, what do you think of?
Light.
Sorry? Light. Who had light? How many people are in this room? 100? 4 people. Maybe 6. I saw another hand, like, sort of careful. Anybody had a word that they think more than 20 people in this room have? Moon? Also 6, 7, maybe. Anybody? Burn? Oh, you're the only fiery one here. Oh, no, wait, there's 2. There's 2. Here's the thing. Words have this weird tendency to make us think that we are in agreement. But very often we're not. I used to do an exercise with students where I would tell them, okay, ask me any question for the next 10 minutes, and then make the game that I'm talking about. And they would ask me questions, and they would all make Super Mario Bros. Because that's what I was talking about. You're a plumber, you walk through a world, you try to collect coins, there's question mark blocks, stuff like that. And they would go like, okay, we'll make it, and then it makes Super Mario Bros. And I would be talking about Mario 3D. But nobody ever made that jump, because I'm a teacher giving a 2-day course. So you can't make Mario 3D, presumably. So I could fail all of them. Now, I didn't enjoy doing that, but I symbolically did it every time, right? They passed the class, don't worry, I'm not evil. But the point that I was trying to make is it's very easy to feel like you're in agreement while you're not. So alignment issues in your team are really tricky and really dangerous. And I think the most important thing I've learned is that if you want to communicate something and you want to be sure that everybody agrees about it, communicate it in the language that you're discussing it in. Which in games means you're talking about art, I want mock-ups. I want sketches, I want silhouettes, I want color studies, whatever you want, I want it visually. We're talking about audio, I want to hear it. I don't care whether you're doing it with your mouth, with a speaker, with some sort of library that you downloaded from the internet, I do not care. But I want to hear it. We're talking about design, I want a prototype. Doesn't care whether it's in paper, doesn't care whether it's on a computer, don't care where it is, but I want to be able to play it. And if not, I want flowcharts. I want to see how this works. Use machinations. Use any of the tools that are available online to visualize your design, and come back to me with that. Code? Pseudocode. It exists. You don't have to fully code a thing. Just go like, okay, this is how we think we're going to do it, right? Communicate in the language that you're speaking about. If you do, you will find that you won't have an issue like a team that I talked to about last year, I think, or maybe it was 2 years ago by now, where halfway through they realized that they were working on different games within their own team. And at that point, they had to go fight about it, because they had both spent 6 months on that game and then realized that they were just thinking about how the entire game worked, the camera perspective, how the game functioned, what buttons were, differently. They were both working mostly separate. They had had discussion at the front. They would talk once or twice every month. And then at some point realized, wait a minute, what are you doing? And that's a very extreme example, but on a much smaller scale, that happens to studios all the time. So communicate in the language they're talking about. Let's talk about game design. And then there's combat. As if combat is the ingredient that video games need to be a video game. Very often, when I hear this sentence, and there's many variations of it, then there's action, then there's platforming, then there's whatever it is, it's a sign of incoherent design. In other words, there's not a clear enough vision as to what the game is. Because here's the thing, you can add combat to a game that is a simulation game. Right? If you have a game where you, I don't know, like control a submarine through like little panels and there's a combat sequence, that can be very exciting. But if you just go, and now there's space invaders with a submarine, it's not going to feel right, because it doesn't feel intentional. So when you have a game, there's always at the heart of it, there's this sort of core vision, this idea of this is what we're making. This is the feeling we're trying to evoke. This is what we're trying to get the player to feel, to do, to experience. Now, if that is very slow, systemic, like little buttons and like dials and numbers, it's totally fine. And if you go, and then we want combat to contrast with that, that's also fine. But then that combat needs to feel intentionally opposite. Not just, also we added combat. Because I can tell you, anybody who has done game design in this room will be able to grab the game and go, this doesn't feel right. And the weird thing is, players can too. The designers can explain to you why. The players, they cannot. They can just tell you that it doesn't feel good. The last thing you want is people to not know why they don't like your game. Much rather make a game where players know why they don't like it so they can yell about it, so that people hear about your game, than have people go like, I don't know, didn't love it. Like, rather make choices that people disagree with than make a thing that people just don't care about, right? So for this one, The second part is that often this happens because teams go like, okay, so we're doing a racing game with shooting. So we can get the racing game audience and the shooting audience. And that's not how that works. The way that works is you have the shooter audience and the racing audience, and where these two intersect, that's your target audience. It's just that little slice. Because the other people will look at it and be like, yeah, that's a little too actiony for me. And the other people will look at it and go like, yeah, that's too much racing for me. And there might be some people that will try, but it's not like you're doubling your target audience. That's not how that works. If you really love farming simulators, which I do, and somebody goes to you, you know what we really need with the space combat, which I also love, I might even look at that and be like, not quite sure I like that mix. So even in the people that hit both target genres, you might not get them. If you are making this, I am so sorry. I found that there's a fairly high chance that there's somebody in this room making this. I don't know, it's very popular right now. The problem with this one is the idea that our take means it's interesting. Because it might not be. Overwhelming chances, overwhelming odds are, it's not. Because you're just making Super Smash, but with your own characters. A lack of unique selling points. I come across very often when I ask people, so why should I buy your game? And they're like, well, you know, it's kind of like a different take on Super Smash. I'm like, is it a better take? Is it a more fun take? Is it a different take? It's like, no, just our take. Cool, developer with no former titles. I have no idea who you are, what you do, or what you're good at. But your take on Super's great. Awesome. It's not a useful way of talking about your game. Right? If you're making a game, you should know why you care. You should know what is special. If you go, okay, we're doing our take on Super Smash, great, I love that. What's your take? If you can't answer that question, you're fucked. Because you don't even know what you're making. Faster Smash? Maybe. More aggressive? Like multiple characters? Is it a turn-based game? Like, I don't know, what's happening? Tell me what's up. Because if you can't communicate that, you won't be able to communicate it to the publishers. You won't be able to communicate it to your audience. You can't even communicate it to your own team. What the fuck's happening? And still, I hear this a lot. It's our take on. Very often, what studios do is they go, this thing is popular, let's do our version of that. And they do it to minimize their risk. Because they go like, oh, but publishers want safer games. Right? They want less risk. You know what they don't want less risk on? Your game. They want less risk on the business side. They want you to make stuff that makes them go, oh shit, wow, okay, cool. They don't want you to make stuff where they're like, huh, what? So yes, there's a line between familiarity and creativity. That's for publishing. If you want to do publishing, you have to walk. If you're self-publishing, do whatever the fuck you want. But you take the risks, right? If you can't communicate it to the audience, that's your problem, right? So, when it comes to this, when it comes to minimizing risk, please don't understand that as in make the safest game. If the game you want to make is a relatively safe game and you can sell it to me, you can discuss it, you can describe why it's special, why it's interesting, let's go. But if you're just being safe because you've heard publishers want to be safe, yeah, you're screwed. Make the weirder shit, right? Make the things you're excited about, but make sure you can communicate them. I think I want to punch people who say this, but I don't like violence, so I won't. But like, sort of like a mental thing. I'm very angry at this statement. I'm very angry at this statement because this kills video games. And it kills video games in a completely unnecessary way. We want to make a good impression on our playtesters. What the fuck do you all think playtesters are for then? They're not there to tell you like, oh yeah, I would buy this. They're there to tell you whether your design works. That's it. You know when you bring in playtesters? When you have a sphere and a cube. And the sphere can move and the cube can shoot. Or walk, or jump, or talk. Or whatever the interaction in your game is. You start playtesting as soon as you have a playable. Is this interesting? Because you think it's interesting. But does anybody else? And then you test again when you get close to your vertical slice. And there's a little bit of an idea of what the vibe is. You test again. And then when you're done at feature complete, you're past alpha, you do it again. And then when you're past beta, you do it again. Or you can do like Team 17 and lay off the entire QA department, apparently. Fuck them. But, you know, when it comes to QA, you want a QA. You want a playtest. You want to get this feeling of how does the game work? Does the mechanic communicate? Are people interested in this? If you can get that really ugly first prototype, where there's just cubes and spheres, and people play that for 10, 15 minutes while talking to you, you're golden. That's awesome. If after 3 minutes you go like, yeah, this is cool, probably iterate a bit more, right? You don't listen to what they say per se. Yeah, you aggregate it, you keep data, but you see what they do. Later on, we start asking questions, but at the start, just get a feeling. Playtesting is not polish. It is not meant to be a thing that you do at the end to make sure whether the game is good. It's something you do during development to make sure your game isn't shit. Because the later you realize the game is shit, the more money it's going to cost you, the more time it's going to cost you, the more dangerous it becomes to your studio. So stop being scared of playtesters. They're not going to bite. They're not going to yell at you. They might. They're just going to give you feedback, and you're going to be able to watch them play. If you can't find any playtesters, reach out in your development networks and ask other developers if they have any playtesters, and if not, let them playtest. Don't playtest internally. Don't playtest yourself. Those things do not count. Stop doing them. I mean, you can playtest your own game, obviously, just don't use it as feedback. But playtest, systematically, continuously. Somebody once wrote an article about how Valve has a flat hierarchy, and since then everybody wants flat hierarchy. Did you know it doesn't even work in Valve? It works nowhere. This doesn't work. You know why? Because it means nobody is accountable for anything. The studio fucks up. Who fucked up? Everybody? That's great. How do you fix that? Fire everybody? Like, where did decision-making go wrong? Who's accountable for this? Who's responsible for a task? Who's in charge of making sure somebody gets done? They're good questions, but in a flat hierarchy, it's like, oh, all of us? It's like, great. So when this feature's late, we got to get 24 people together and have a long conversation about whether we're late or not. That's going to go great. I'm sure this is not going to delay anything at all, right? And yeah, you can create different scenarios. You can have committees on specific things, or you can say these people are kind of in charge of things, but they're not kind of. Just have clear responsibilities, please. Undefined responsibilities, probably one of the biggest threats to a game company. You want at least 2 roles defined in any games company, which is your creative lead, creative director, whatever you want to call them, and whoever's in charge of production. Whoever's in charge of the business part of it, making sure timelines get hit, making sure budgets get hit. Those 2 roles need to be defined. Then from there, you can kind of create whatever you want. That's totally fine. But there need to be people who are accountable for if things go wrong. And the way you do that is by getting the people who are better at managing things to manage things, and then having people who are good at doing things do those things. Right? Not to say management isn't doing, I need to rephrase that somehow, but you know what I mean. Teams really like the idea of democratizing things. Democratizing things slows things down. We don't need a dictatorship. Yes, your director should absolutely listen to what the team has to say. But ultimately, they're going to make the call. And if their call is wrong, that's on them. Back at my old studio, at Vlaambeer, JW was in charge of design, and I was in charge of programming and production, business, stuff like that. And the funny thing about that is, every now and then, I would have design feedback, and JW would go like, yeah, you're right. It was rare that he would say that, but it happened. And when it happened, if that turned out to be the wrong call, there was never any argument about that was his fault, even if it was my idea. Because he's in charge of design. And him listening to me and making a call that did not work out was on him. In the same way, every now and then he would have business feedback. And every now and then I would listen to it. And if that would turn out to be wrong, that's my fault. That way, the person who's responsible for a thing can improve, can be held accountable, and we can figure out how to do better in the future. So whether you run the day-to-day in a relatively flat hierarchy or not, make sure that everybody understands who's in charge, who's accountable, who's responsible, who gets consultant for a question. There's actually complete exercise for this. There's the RACI charts if you want to get really formal about it, but figure out these responsibilities. So most teams figure out that they need milestones, but the weird thing about the milestones I find is that's the only way they ever define what the deliverables are. They go like, okay, at this milestone we need this and that. And then the in-between is like, we'll get there. We'll figure it out. You don't. You want to run a game production relatively well, your team needs deliverables. You need deliverables. You need these like small wins along the road that is like, oh, we hit this. We managed to get that done. You need a sense of momentum, and you get a sense of momentum by telling people this needs to be done at that time. And then you don't have to be really rough about those deadlines per se, but you do want deliverables. You do want to say, okay, you know what, by the end of this milestone, we have half of the content ready. So let's say by a third of the milestone, we want 2 levels ready. Okay, and then see whether we hit it. If we don't hit it, we know something's up. We can figure out what the delta is. Where did we expect to be? Where are we now? And we can adjust our process accordingly, which gives us a better chance of shipping a thing within the scope of what we're capable of on time. If you figure out that you're behind milestone at the alpha milestone, which is halfway through your development, you're now suddenly crunching. Because you have limited time, you've never even looked at rescoping because we'll figure it out at alpha, and then you're stuck. So I'm not saying you need some sort of like heavy documentation or anything. That's not what I'm saying at all, but what I am saying is you do want to make sure that there's in-between deliverables and milestones for your team. This one is clearly very related, but you can't. You can't fix it with more time. You want to iterate on something? Set a goal, set a timeline, figure it out in that time. If you don't figure it out, set a new iteration. If you're close, you feel you're almost there, do another iteration of the same thing. If you don't feel close, you're not confident, kill it. Next thing. Some iterations I see on like prototype or vertical slice take 6 months to 12 months. That's a year of development time. That's a third of your funding if you get a 3-year development budget. Just evaporate it, because you just got stuck on one thing for too long. Now, it's not bad to iterate on a thing you think is going to be good, but you need to set limits to yourself. You need to tell yourself, okay, we're going to iterate. We're going to take this much time. At the end of that, did we get close? If yes, let's try again. If no, do something else. There needs to be a clear idea of what happens when an iteration fails. What if we don't get it? There's a thing in aviation we call get-there-itis. I fly small airplanes, and as part of training, we got taught about get-there-itis. And it's this idea that pilots sometimes get so focused on achieving the goal that they have pre-planned for themselves that they don't check whether there's a thundercloud in between. Or that they go, you know what, by the time I get there, it's probably gone. You know what happens to those pilots? They die. It's literally lethal. It is considered one of the most lethal things in aviation is get-there-itis. Now, it's not as extreme in game development, but get-there-itis kills game projects. I can tell you that, and it does it frequently. So we don't. I think we discussed this. You don't figure it out as we go. There is a difference between being fluid in your process and allowing yourself to go back in the process over and over again. So if you say, okay, at production, ideation is done. We know what we're making, we've defined it, we're going to make that. And then during production you go, actually, what if we go back and ideate something? No. There's a reason you said we're done. Then be done with it. If there is an emergency, yes, you can go back. But in that case, you also need to have a very serious conversation with whoever cleared that milestone as to why the fuck we're past this milestone and now going back. The reason we create these milestones as a unidirectional thing, as doors that close behind you, like at an airport, is because that trick there means everything you've done past that gate is potentially useless now. If we agree this is how high a jump is, and we start designing levels, and then we go, actually, let's redo the jump, all your levels are screwed. And you go back. They're one directional. Before you go through that gate, make sure you all agree that you have your luggage and you left nothing on the airplane, right? So this is a new phrase, and I call it pitch stalling. Publishers have gotten a little bit more risk-averse. They've gotten a little slower. Economy isn't as good, money is expensive, so things take more time. What happens with pitch stalling is publishers will often ask for you to deliver more so that they can evaluate the risk better. And usually what they request is expanded vertical slices, additional content, come back in 6 months, whatever it is, right? That's terrifying. That was EA, wasn't it? Pitch stalling is when developers over-focus on delivering what the publisher wants. So they take all of their resources off of actual development, and they put it towards whatever the publisher asks. That expanded vertical slice. Now, the problem with that is that very often what happens is that that vertical slice that they're making is not actual content for the game. It is just what they're making because the publishers asked for it, and it's what the developer thinks the publisher wants to see. Maybe they wanted to see more of a specific mechanic. Now, we don't really know what the mechanic is, but let's just build a level where we can show it. That level is not going to get used in production. So you're going to throw it away. So that's 2, 3, 4 weeks of development that you're just tossing away. And the publisher, they might not even be committed to your game. They're just asking to get some more time. So if you're ever in this situation, try to avoid this hyperfocus. Publisher wants something? Cool. What on the actual development timeline that we're doing can we give them that would help? And if that's nothing, then the conversation might just have to stop there. You go and you say, hey, listen, we currently don't have anything like that on the timeline. We don't really have the resources right now to expand too much on that. We'll get back to you if the game is still available at that time. Done. Move on. If that's your last publisher, it might just not be possible to make this game work. Hopefully, you've not spent so much time getting here that you're now stuck forever. So, unique selling points. We talked about unique selling points. You know what the weird thing is? That most of the games that I work with that are really successful, from the start, they know what thing of the game is going to go in their trailer. They just do. They have this feeling of like, oh yeah, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to communicate it. From the start, they're thinking about how does it communicate to the audience, to the user, to the people on the store page. What is going to look cool? What's going to feel cool? And they have this thing where they can go like, oh yeah, this game, they can imagine what somebody in the audience, somebody watching a Twitch stream might say. They might say something like, oh yeah, it's the game with the thing, right? It's this with that. Or it's like that, but more this, right? Or even better, it's the game with no comma. It's just that's the game. From the moment they start, they know that. Sometimes it comes a little later, but before they hit vertical slice, they're fully aware of what it's going to be that people are going to talk about. That's marketing. Those are marketing glasses. Marketing is not a separate thing. Stop thinking of it as a separate thing. It is the same thing as game development because it's communication. We're communicators. We pick the worst way of communicating with people. We train computers to do things, and then we add art and polygons and sprites and audio files, and then we go like, and now you play this, and do you understand? Our entire job is communication. So from the start, thinking about how to communicate your game is really important, really helpful. I'm out of time, so luckily I'm at the conclusion. If you're looking at what the continuous problem is in most of these, it's assumptions. People hear stories of game development. They hear stories of successful games. They hear stories of failed games. And what they hear, they make into rules. This is what is needed. This is what's important. We can get away with this. We can do it this way. All the studios do it X, but we're going to do it Y, right? The assumptions are a misplacement of focus, mismanagement, and a misunderstanding of what creativity actually is, does, and needs. And it's weird, because when I started games, I wanted it to just be like, do whatever the fuck I want. That sounded great. Let's just program until it works. That was great until I wanted to ship something. I wanted to actually have made a video game. Not even about money. Just, I wanted to get to the end of a video game, please. And I realized that there needs to be a management of that process. There needs to be a direction, an intentionality to creativity that focuses on creating something that people can engage with. It's like the canvas for a painter. The first decision a painter makes is the canvas. How big is it? What material is it? We need to have that same intentionality to our creative process. Because all of these are relatively easy to avoid for the average game maker. If you just take a moment, sit down, and think. Which of the things that I'm thinking I know for a fact, and which of the things that I'm thinking I think? Creativity you can do on I think. But the rest of it, better make sure you're right. I don't think I have time for questions. If you want more, find it here, ltpf.ramiismail.com. That's my newsletter. You can check out more of these thoughts there. And thanks so much.
All right. Once again, we're going to do a very quick tech setup switch, and then we'll move on with our next speaker.